A very good evening to you. In the business segment on the ballot brief, we tackle the issue of economic policy and financial ability by political parties to meet the promises made in their respective manifestos. It comes as a recent South African policy uncertainty index edged further into negative territory over doubt around the country's 2024 election dynamics. That is also weighing on investor confidence and financial markets. Economist Dr Roelof Botha discusses this with us. Thank you so much for your time, Dr. Botha. What actually forms the basis of party economic policy that should stand out for South Africans when looking for an option to implement reforms in the upcoming elections?
Yes, personally I believe that if you look at the ANC's ideas, promises, then there's some hope for optimism. They will get the lion's share of the vote. There is absolutely no doubt about that. So it's important to focus on what they want to do, what they have done in the last 10 to 15 years, mainly as a result of the state capture era, the so-called lost decade, as ex-Minister Trevor Manuel calls it. It was, you can think of some other names, a disastrous, absolutely disastrous decade when corruption and incompetence was at the order of the day, and any viewer that doubts the accuracy of my standpoint, welcome to have a look at the Zondo Commission. It's frightening stuff, and we are trying to recover from that. And now, are we going to do that? Well, the ANC's executive leadership has promised us that the private sector will become more involved. And what I've just said is unbelievably important, because it's probably our only hope. If one looks at the state of our infrastructure in South Africa, the roads outside of the Western Cape are in a shocking condition. The national roads are still okay, but the minute you deviate from that, you've got serious, serious problems. Not to mention energy, not to mention the railways, not to mention harbors. The good news is that all of this can be fixed with the right skills and the right supportive policy. So if they actually embark on such a strategy of effectively privatization, but it's more than privatization. It's taking hands. It's working together with the private sector. The private sector has already clearly demonstrated its willingness to participate. Then we can certainly look forward within a year or two to a stage where we have a repeat of that growth phase that we had a decade and a half ago, of almost 2 decades ago, of 5% growth per annum for 4 years in a row.
And it's quite interesting that you mentioned that not all hope is lost. There could be a turnaround, irrespective of how long that takes. And I want to ask the question around, if not the ANC, should any other political party emerge victorious? They don't have a magic wand. What would it take for a turnaround to basically rebuild from those years of corruption?
Well, South Africans, and maybe they don't fully appreciate this, if they visit the Western Cape, they will appreciate the fact that here we have a case study of a province where the municipalities actually answer the phone and where they have mastered the art of fixing potholes. And this is absolutely brilliant, because one can really learn from that. The point of service delivery that affects citizens, ordinary citizens, the most intimately, is at municipal level. And almost a third of our country's municipalities, all of them outside of the Western Cape, are dysfunctional. Most of them technically bankrupt. The incompetence is rife. The infrastructure is shocking. Sewage systems that haven't worked for more than a decade. It can be fixed. So, I'm just thinking out loud. It would be fantastic if the DA, which is the second largest party and will remain so, and the ANC, which is the largest party and will remain so, I've got no doubt about that, if they can collaborate just a little bit, on the issue of running a municipality the way it's supposed to be run, appoint people that have the right experience, the right qualifications, and that are not party political animals. I'm talking about engineers, project managers, highly skilled people, professionals that just want the town to be run properly. It can be done. That's the good news.
Now, Dr. Botha, you mentioned the word collaboration, and in South African politics, we have gotten to customize ourselves with the governance of coalition parties. At a national scale, we have not seen it yet, but would that work given the economic dynamics of this country, because economic policy from party to party differ?
Yes, certainly. In all truth, we haven't had many case studies, none successful as far as I know, of successful coalitions in our politics up to this point. There have been one or two not so successful attempts, which involved minority parties who are radical in their approach towards economics. There's one party in particular that uses Zimbabwe and Venezuela as their role models, where you have a total failure, a slide into failed state status, an exodus of high-skilled people, no direct foreign investment, and fortunately, they will, with a bit of luck, I'm predicting they won't be, but with a bit of luck, these radical parties will not become involved. There will be smaller parties that will take hands, either with the ANC or with the DA, and that will strengthen, let's call it the middle of the road political parties in South Africa that appreciate the importance of maintaining a free enterprise economy. With the definition of a communism, of a communist, as you probably know, is it's somebody who's got nothing, but he wants to share it with you.
So how then would you respond, Dr. Botha, to a notion that, well, in ANC rhetoric, it is the triple challenges in the economy: unemployment, poverty, and inequality, with a sense of the needle having changed in terms of prioritizing economic growth in this country to alleviate the three triple challenges that I've just mentioned? Is there room and space for a more defined messaging that speaks to a voter as opposed to just messaging that is thrown around?
Yes, the slogans have been very generalized. We're going to create jobs, but they need to become a little bit more specific. And one issue which I hope will receive immediate attention, and this should go down extremely well amongst South Africans, especially lower income groups and even the unemployed, is to look at a piece of legislation that, to my mind, has never been actually enacted in practice, and that is the ULTRA Act, the Urban Land Transformation Act, which was designed to give owners of RDP houses, of dwellings that have a resale value in informal settlements, title deeds, so that they could access some form of collateral, which can be used, obviously, with a bit of luck for improving the property, maybe a water tank on the roof, to harvest rainwater, get a vegetable garden going, build an extra room to rent out, etc. This could have explosive economic growth and employment growth in South Africa. We built almost 4 million RDP houses, many during the Mandela and Mbeki era, and we created literally millions of jobs. We should resuscitate these type of programs with the aid of the private sector, but they should be involved. Private sector experts should be involved from the beginning of these projects, from the tender stage to the evaluation stage to the monitoring stage. Then we can make it.
That's an interesting dynamic that you throw in there, and I'm interested because any political party is subjected to the current fiscus, and we know there are challenges even there. To what extent is that maybe a barrier for political parties to get this turnaround that we are talking about?
Well, National Treasury, fortunately, is the one government department or state agency that was never captured by the state capturers, the Guptas, and under the leadership of Mr. Zuma. And I really hope that South Africans can remind themselves of the damage inflicted on this economy by state capture and by Mr. Ramaphosa's predecessors. It has been calculated at a loss of GDP of almost 3 trillion rand. I hope they remind themselves of this before they go to vote. But the fiscus is obviously constraint on any government or any party that wants to be in power in a free enterprise democracy. But in South Africa's case, we are fortunate to have a total public debt GDP ratio of marginally above 70%. We have a large measure of stability in our public finances. And the important aspect here is that your fiscal constraint can disappear if you have high enough growth. Because with growth comes more taxes, more employment, another round of more taxes. And if a government is prudent in its expenditures and concentrates on expenditures that have a high multiplier effect, like capital formation, I'm talking infrastructure here, then the fiscal constraint is not such a big problem. But then it should be obviously handled by a political party, which will, as I said earlier, there's not much doubt about this, the ANC. And if you look at the way that the Western Cape's finances are handled, I mean, it is absolutely superb. So that is not a huge concern. This country's only priority should be to create jobs, as many jobs as possible. And if they can launch a job creation initiative where private sector firms and business chambers and sector-specific chambers, like, for instance, Steel Industry Federation, etc., where they are invited to inform government of what changes can be effected, maybe removal of some unnecessary regulations, amendments of labor legislation specifically, maybe putting Black B on the back burner for some sectors, just temporarily at least, just to get jobs growing. Because for each job that we create in South Africa, you broaden the tax base and you alleviate poverty immediately at that point in time. That should be the only priority.
Always eye-opening. Speaking to you, Dr. Roelof Botha is an economist speaking to us about the economics of the elections.